My name is Neil. I work at Databricks, which provides the data intelligence platform, is what I've been told to say. And I work on the streaming team. So I work on real-time data processing. And today we're going to talk about correct and low latency real-time streaming joins. We're going to have to go through a bunch of hoops to get there, but we're going to get there. OK. So first question, what do these have in common? So on the top left, we have a live traffic map of New York City. On the bottom left, we have a live busyness map of a particular restaurant that I chose. And on the right, we have an OpenAI usage dashboard of GPT. So over the course of this talk, I'm going to ask you to talk to your neighbor. I'm going to ask you many questions. So go ahead, introduce yourselves, and answer this question. And I'll bring you back in 30 seconds. All right. 3, 2, 1. We're back. OK, great. So hands. I want to see hands. Raise your hand. Tell me what you think the answer is. Come on. Yes?
The more real-time the data is, the better.
The more real-time the data is, the better. Yes, very good. More hands? We will wait here until I see one more hand. Yes? Yes, it all uses usage data, right? So it relies on some derived feature. People are driving around, and then you derive some statistic for it. And that would be true. So what I'm trying to get at is that the world is becoming real time. Consumers want their Maps app to show the current traffic conditions. They want their short-form video app to adapt to their current interests. And enterprises want the current conversion rate of an advertising campaign, so that on Black Friday, they can optimize what they show as it happens. And so historically, you might reach for something like a batch job. Running a batch job on a cron tab has been the historical solution, but it won't always give you the guarantees that you want. And so if you run a repeated batch job on a cron, you don't have strong delivery semantics. How do you make sure that you process something exactly once, even in the case of failures? You also don't handle out-of-order events, which we'll talk about. If you write a bespoke job, right, you write some Rust, right, you get this done, it's not declarative, which means that only you can do it. So the data engineers at your company don't have access to it. And the development cycles are way longer. So how do we fix this? Well, we've had SQL for a while. But streaming SQL lets us write SQL over constantly evolving data. And so a streaming SQL query specifies something like a source, SQL operators like group by, filter, join, project, these sorts of things, and a sink. And what the engine will do is it will repeatedly read from the source, process some data, and write it to the sink. And it will give you some really nice benefits. It's distributed. It's scalable, right? It's declarative. So anybody who knows some SQL can sort of do this. You get strong delivery semantics. You handle out-of-order data. And best of all, when it fails, I get paged, not you. Actually, you'd probably get paged too, but both of us get paged. OK, so over the course of this talk, we're going to talk about streaming aggregations with a naive aggregation. Then we're going to understand the nature of out-of-orderness in distributed systems. We're going to do a smarter aggregation, and then move on to inner joins and outer joins. So here we go. We'll do a naive aggregation with a 100-second tumbling window count, which means that we want to compute the number of events that fall between 100 and 200, 200 and 300, et cetera. And we're using the timestamp on the events themselves. So we receive a record, and we think to ourselves, OK, well, I might still receive something in this 100 to 200 window, and so I'm not going to compute the aggregate. This happens, right? You receive another event. You still could receive something in the window, but the moment that you don't, at timestamp 220, you think to yourself, OK, I'm done with 100 to 200. I'm going to compute the aggregate, which you happily do. You get a 2, and you emit that downstream to wherever that might be, like Kafka. You repeat the process. You see something that falls into the next window. And so you say, OK, 200 to 300 must be done. So you go ahead and compute that aggregate, and you emit that downstream. But then something happens. you receive some out-of-order data. Some stuff for windows that you already emitted. So how do you handle this? Well, the first thing we saw is we're always going to have to buffer some of the data in intermediary state. But then the second question becomes, when do we emit the results? Do we emit the result every time it changes? So we receive a new record, we recompute the aggregate, and we emit that downstream. Or do we emit the aggregates only once after waiting for a fixed amount of time? Let's consider both. Option 1, you can emit an aggregate whenever it changes, which means that results are always up to date. If you get some new data, you're going to recompute the aggregate and emit that downstream. But the con to this is that downstream consumers need to know about these semantics, that the same aggregate can return multiple values. And this is not great if you're running a billing pipeline, because you could say, okay, Phil spent $10,000 this month. You send him a bill on April 2nd. And then one day later, you're like, actually, I got some late data. He spent $20,000. And you send him a second bill. I don't know about him, but I'd be a little bit annoyed, right? I want to see one bill. I don't want to have to see that number constantly going up. So the downstream consumers have to know you could get multiple. And you also have to keep all those records in state buffered indefinitely. For something incrementalizable, like a count, you just keep one long, fairly easy. But for something like a median, not a sketched median, just a median, or a UDF, you need to keep all the records. And that's going to be an issue if you want your streaming job to run forever. The second option is for you to emit an aggregate once after waiting for some amount of time. And the benefit here is that you can perform state eviction. You can remove things from the buffered state after you wait that amount of time. And the downstream consumers see one result. If you say this person spent this much money in this month, you charge them that. And that's the end. The downside here is that if some is too long, you have excessively high latency. We're going to focus on this for the rest of the talk, largely because it's more interesting. This leads us to a fundamental trade-off in streaming systems. If SQL operators don't wait for very long, you'll have low latency, you emit very quickly, little amounts of state that you keep, but low completeness. You're going to miss some records. But if you wait for too long, you're going to have high latency, high amounts of state, but high completeness. So how do we trade this off? The key to know is that delays in distributed systems are not arbitrary. Interleavings are arbitrary. We shouldn't make any guesses on how processes and threads interleave. But delays usually follow some distribution. So this tells us that 10% of events arrive in 25 seconds, within 25 seconds. You add up from left to right. 50% of events arrive within 50 seconds, et cetera, until we get to the 99th percentile, which tells us 99% of events arrive within 100 seconds. And so what we can do is by choosing how much delay we have, we configure the completeness that we get. OK, let's visualize this. The 10th percentile delay, which went by too quickly, is this much. The 50th percentile gets a little bit larger, until we get to the 99th percentile delay. So now, that was actually not supposed to animate, but that has no semantic meaning. If we know that the source has generated a record with timestamp 250, our goal now is to figure out the timestamp before which we no longer receive records. Is there a time before which we can say we're done, no more records? So we'll put on the delay that we choose. We'll choose the 99th percentile. And now, anything before this red line over here must have arrived. Why is that? OK, let's put a record on the screen. And let's add the delay to it. We know that, that even if that record was maximally delayed, it must have arrived before 250 was generated, right? That make sense? Raise your hand. Yeah? OK. And so what that tells us is that anything to the left of that red line, so the most recent record we have minus the delay, must have already arrived. according to the correctness percentile that we've configured. And so that has a special name. It's called the watermark. And so the watermark is a timestamp, and it tells us that anything with an event time or timestamp on the record less than the watermark must have already arrived. And so anything within the blue region is now ignored, and anything after the blue region can still arrive. Okay, so let's put this into practice. We're going to do a very similar aggregation as last time, but now we're going to use a watermark. So we subtract off the delay and we get the watermark. We do this again. It advances. And at this point, in the last example, what we did is we said, OK, I have something at timestamp 220. I must have received everything from 100 to 200, and so I'm going to close this aggregate. I'm going to compute it. But what we see now is that we still might receive some records between the watermark and timestamp 200. And so we still wait. Indeed, what happens is that we receive an out-of-order record that's greater than the watermark and less than 200, which means that we got some extra completeness by waiting a little bit longer. And now we receive something at 320-ish, and the watermark advances past 200. And so what that tells us is that we will not receive any more records in the window 100 to 200. And so then we can compute the aggregate of 3 and emit that downstream. And now if we receive a record in this window, we know that it's too late because it must be an outlier. It must be in that 1% of events that come too late. And we're actually fine ignoring it because the delay that you configured is you telling the streaming engine how long and what completeness you want. So we ignore it. Questions? Yes? Good? OK. So watermarks are the minimum timestamp that a stream expects to see. And SQL operators can leverage this definition to correctly implement their semantics. In the case of an aggregate, it noticed that when the watermark exceeded the end of a window, that window would no longer change, and it could count, emit downstream. OK, so we're going to pause. I can answer some questions, and then we're going to get to a true-false. So questions? Yes?
How do you deal with semantic errors like clocks on the source of events?
Yes.
Emitting everything at the wrong time.
Yes, that is certainly an issue. I think for the purposes of this talk, we can assume that that does not happen. I haven't seen that.
I've seen it way too many times.
Oh, yeah? I would like to know about your source afterwards. But yeah, let's assume that that does not happen. OK. If there are no questions, we can get to the true-false. Talk to your neighbor, and we'll come back in about a minute.
When you ask a question, try to rephrase it so we get it on camera, because the crowd is in.
Sure, yes. I can also rephrase it right now.
Yeah, it is.
OK, so now that we've discussed, I'm going to put a hint on the board. So go ahead, draw the little delay that we had previously, draw the watermark, and see, is this still true? Is this false? And keep talking to your neighbor.
Yeah, maybe the watermark.
Counterexample for the yes. Imagine that you end up with a window that's 100 miles, so your P99 is 100 miles, and you stop streaming events at 299. Then you'll never make the events in 100 kilometers because your watermark is in your window is not because it's sliding. The watermark is a sliding window, but you have fixed
Okay, do we need some more time? How are we doing? Okay. So, okay, we're back. Let's do this. Anybody want to raise their hand and tell me what you and your partner thought? I actually did hear the right answer from some groups, and so some of you know. I'm going to wait. You're gonna get home late. It's not, yeah, I'm fine. I canceled my meetings. Yes.
False.
Why?
It's evicted but not added to that.
Okay, that's one option. So it's false, and it will be evicted but not added to the aggregate. Okay, that's one option. Anything else? Any other ideas? Come on, hands, guys, come on. Yes.
Fine, I'll go. I'd say almost true.
Almost true, yes. Why?
Because, so imagine that you have, to make it simple, your P99 or P whatever width is 100, and imagine that you stop streaming events at 199. So the last timestamp you ever see is 199. That means that your watermark is at 99, and you'll never evict the first window.
Yes, okay, so to rephrase, the comment was that if you have a record at timestamp 199 with a watermark delay of 100, that means that your watermark is now set to 199 minus 100, which is 99. And at that point, you will not evict the records for the windows 0 to 100, because you still could receive a record at 99.5. Okay. So the answer is yes, almost true. It's false. And the myth that I see a lot on Stack Overflow and whatnot is that the stream removes all records in state less than the watermark. And this isn't true. And I know I'm being pedantic, but when you write a SQL engine, you ought to have correct results. And so in this case, if you were to evict anything before the watermark, you would evict that record. And then when the watermark crossed 300, you would not have that record, and your count would be wrong. So the first fact is that the watermark will not acknowledge, or sorry, the stream will not acknowledge any new records before the watermark. So within this blue region, no new records will be acknowledged. And then the second fact is that the operators, whether it be a SQL streaming aggregation or a streaming join, will use this fact to implement their particular semantics. So in this case, the aggregation knows once the watermark passes the end of 300, it can calculate the aggregate from 200 to 300. Okay, any questions? This is going to be very essential for the joins. Okay, wow. Let's get to joins. Things are heating up. Okay, a very common use case is to join ad clicks and product purchases together. So you're scrolling Facebook, you click on an ad, you get sent to someone's website, you scroll a bit, and you purchase something, and Facebook is interested in telling their advertisers what percentage of ad clicks resulted in somebody buying it, or how long did it take between clicking and purchasing it. Very common. Keep in mind that for inner joins, this is a SQL inner join as well, you omit left, right for all left and right that satisfy the criteria. So a single left might join with many things on the right. Data on either side in the streaming join case can come out of order, and so we're going to use watermarks to help us account for this. And we need to evict records from our buffered state on both sides so that we avoid infinite state growth, because having infinite amounts of memory is not practical yet. So state removal for inner joins. We're going to join on the IDs being the same. And clearly, there is nothing on the right, so we don't join. We receive another record on the left. The watermark advances. And as per the quiz question, we do not evict A. That would be a correctness issue. I would be paged. And so we keep that in state. And as expected, something with ID A comes along on the right. These two records satisfy the join condition, and so we emit these downstream. Again, we receive another record with ID A. The condition is true, and we emit that downstream. And we emit that downstream. And so you think to yourself, when can I evict some of these records? This is just like getting out of hand. And the truth is that you could receive a record at the end of time itself, and you would still need to perform that join because the IDs are the same. Our job implementing a streaming engine is to satisfy the condition. So what's the issue here? Well, the issue is that this A at the top can join with any A on the right. This A on the left can join with any A on the right. We need to limit that somehow. So if we had a click, for example, A on the left, it can join with any future purchase of A on the right. So we need to time-bound the join so that the top A does not join with just any A on the right. At some point, we're like, OK, you've been around too long. See ya. So let's do that. We now introduce a time condition. OK. And you can take just a moment to sort of orient yourself, see what this means on this. OK. And now, we receive an A, and we can plug things in. So the left timestamp over here is 300, and so this becomes 300. And so we're saying that the right timestamp has to be less than 400. OK, we check. The right timestamp is less than 400. The IDs are the same, and so we emit the join. Cool. And now we receive an A at timestamp 500 on the right. And so the watermark updates accordingly. And IDs are the same, but we go and we check the condition. We say the left timestamp is 300. We add them together, so right must be less than 400. But the right timestamp is 500, and so these don't join together. So we don't perform the join. And now the question is, what can we evict? So the streaming engine will do this for you. It'll figure out what can it evict. And the way it does this, approximately speaking, is it will do effectively a find and replace on the join condition. So we're going to say, let's see if we can evict this top A. We're going to replace L.ID with A. Right? We're going to replace left.timestamp with 300. Everybody saw that, right? This 300 went over there. And we're going to add these together. And we're going to see, will this evaluate to true at any point in the future? So now, talk to your neighbor. See, will this condition evaluate to true at any point in the future? Will we receive a record on the right that satisfies this? Go ahead.
Then we should be able to take one of them first. We get a, I guess it's the timestamp of the first one.
OK, 3, 2, 1, and we're back. OK. Hands, what do we think? Can we evict this top record from the left? Why or why not? I think like this corner of the room was doing really well, so.
We can't evict A from the left stream because even though the condition for evicting that is defined using the join is satisfied, the watermark in the left stream hasn't passed 300. So.
Okay, so the statement was we can't evict it because the watermark on the left side has not passed 300. Okay, that was the first statement. Any other ideas from the audience? Yes?
So we can evict because the watermark's above 400, so for all future points in R, the timestamp will be greater than 400.
Okay, the statement was because the right-hand side watermark is greater than 400, this means that we will not see or acknowledge any new records on the right in this blue region, which means that we will never receive a write timestamp less than 400. And that is the right answer. This record on the top will join with something on the right when this is true, when this condition is true. But the streaming engine will realize that the watermark on the right is greater than 400, and so this can never be true in the future. It evaluates to inner join on A equals right.id and false. The and false makes the entire thing false. And this thing is marked for removal, and it gets evicted from state. Great, okay. So we saw that we have to time-bound our inner join condition, so joins don't happen indefinitely. And we remove state from one side using the other side's watermark. Surreal, I know. Okay, state removal in outer joins is actually follows fairly well from the previous example. So the question here is, can we evict this B from state? So we know that it hasn't joined with anything yet because we only have A's. And so we want to know, should we emit a B comma null, right? A null join because it's a left outer join. So what we do is we do the same thing. We replace left ID with B. We know that we could receive a right ID of anything in the future, so we have to move on. We replace the left timestamp with 300. We add these together. The streaming engine knows that the watermark on the right is greater than 400, so nothing will arrive in this blue region. So this condition will always evaluate to false. And so you get inner left outer join on B equals right.id and false. The entire thing evaluates to false. You evict that from state, and you emit a B null outer join row. Okay. We made it. So the summary is that users expect lots of features to be real time, and out-of-order data forces us to make this trade-off between latency and completeness. So if you want low latency, you will have to set a delay accordingly. And doing this yourself is very hard because, as we saw through this talk, using watermarks correctly in your SQL operators like joins and aggregations is actually not trivial. It's very subtle. I heard many people saying this question is a trick question. It also happens to be my job. And so I think you should give streaming engines a chance. They might just do what you need. I work on Apache Spark structured streaming, so that's my first pick. But other engines in the ecosystem like Apache Flink are also great options. So thank you so much. Find me on Twitter if you want more of this. And tell me about your use cases. And I'd love to talk more about streaming. Thanks.